what this episode will teach you is why your relationship ends up being in a roommate, why there's emotionally distance, why you end up falling out with your friends, why you end up being distant from friends, family members, or your partner, or even why you end up breaking up with your partner or having that rejection within the relationship. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sinead Says Podcast. This week, we're diving right into emotions and we're talking a little bit about mastering our emotions. If you've listened to the episode Mastering Your Emotions, I think it's on season 1, but it is one of the most downloaded episodes. And to this day, it still gets loads and loads of downloads. I don't know how, I don't know if people send it to their friends, but, and it's so funny because it's years ago. So I have another partner there and everything. So it's like, I'm talking about these things that are happening in my life and everyone will message me about that episode. But anyway, that one's called Mastering Your Emotions. And people were really taken back by understanding their emotions. And they were like, oh my God, as if I didn't know this before, understanding why they feel certain ways so they can rather avoid that feeling or they can get more of that feeling. So Mastering Your Emotions, down at season 1, very good episode if you're liking this episode. So this episode is all about resentment, right? And when we talk about resentment, what this episode will teach you is why your relationship ends up being in a roommate, why there's emotionally distance, why you end up falling out with your friends, why you end up being distant from friends, family members, or your partner, or even why you end up breaking up with your partner or having that rejection within the relationship. And it usually comes down to an emotion called resentment. So we're going to dive into resentment, and that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to just go through the process of that in the podcast, and then we're going to just do the usual thing that we do, quote of the week and a message from you. So as you may know, this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, which is an online therapy platform. And this week we're talking all about resentment and emotional distance within the relationship. And therapy is such an amazing tool. If you are feeling emotionally distant or you just want to up-level your relationship, you want to have more intimacy and you want to become better communicating, cannot recommend BetterHelp enough. You can literally cozy up with your partner and you can talk to the therapist together and become a stronger, more communicative and more intimate couple. So if you want to get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp, you can go to betterhelp.com/Sinead. That is betterhelp.com/Sinead. And please let me know if you've tried, and I would love hearing all your reviews. So let's get into why I've started this episode. Was on a night out. Well, it wasn't a night out, it was just in a bar. Someone came up to me and actually had mentioned a small chapter in my book. So if anyone doesn't know and you're new, I actually wrote a book on relationships. I was actually studying relationships a few years ago, did my relationship coach, just was outstanding. I felt like there was so much information out there that people needed to know. So I actually wrote a book called Relationships, You Should Know These Things. And I wrote everything that came up within those courses and within my practice. And I just kind of put down what I thought people should know. The book is an ebook. You can buy it on my underneath here. It's literally $8.99 if you like it. But anyway, somebody came up to me and they were like, Sinead, that chapter that you wrote on roommate, how to not make your partner your roommate, really stood out to me and it saved my relationship. So I was like, oh my God, that is such an interesting topic for the podcast as well, because I don't think I've talked about that. How you end up being really distant from your partner and how to bring that back. So I thought I would read out the small chapter and then we would just talk about resentment as an emotion itself. Can I say I buzz off this stuff? I buzz emotions and relationships and understanding yourself. Oh my God. No, honestly, guys, woo, it gets me off. It really does. I was so excited about this episode. I was like, I can't wait to sit down and just discuss this. And I can't wait to hear your feedback. So please give me feedback. I wrote a little chapter in the book and it was called Don't Let Your Lover Become Your Roommate. All right. Resistance occurs when your partner does something that may upset you. Maybe they've liked a photo they shouldn't have liked. Maybe they were a little bit rude to you in public, or maybe you're probably afraid to address it because you're like, it's not really that big deal. So you kind of just bury it. Little small things. Maybe you're doing all the cleaning and they're not doing any cleaning. Maybe you feel like you're doing loads and loads, especially new moms feel a lot of resentment towards dads because they have to do a lot and their life doesn't change. A lot of resentment there. But anyway, you don't want to address it, right? And you don't want to seem needy or come across really paranoid. So instead you end up withdrawn from your partner and you grow a little distant. So you've got that resentment towards them. Anyway, you grow distant anyway. The resistance will then turn into resentment. Now you're just not annoyed, you're angry. And resentment destroys intimacy. This is such a destructive pattern, and if it continues to not be acknowledged, then this leads to rejection. The point where you have so much resentment built up in you that you try to reduce the pain by creating emotional numbness. You avoid feeling pain, but you also avoid feeling passion and excitement. This is when you now have a roommate, not a romantic partner. From the outside looking in, things might look rosy because you guys don't fight. But what's left no longer really resembles a relationship. So in the book, I talk about a few solutions, but we're actually going to dive right deep into it after I read some of these. So as soon as you notice that feeling of resistance, recognize what's happening and make the effort to communicate with your partner using appropriate language in order to prevent these things escalating and getting heated. And you can also change the language around this when you're talking. So it seems really difficult at the time, right? To say you're actually feeling like a little bit of resentment. The worst thing about resentment is that the emotion comes before actually knowing what it is. Actually knowing what it's resentment, like the feeling of the emotion is so heightened that you actually can't recognize right now what it's about, but you only feel the emotion before like recognizing it. But like what podcasts like this do is like make you realize that, oh my God, that is a resentment and that is why I feel like that. Usually when you communicate with the partner, it can all be softened, all right? And we're going to talk more about that. But you can change your language when you're going into these conversations, you know, that this really pisses me off. You can change to, this has upset me a little. You can change, I can't stand when you do that, to, I would prefer if you did it this way because this way makes me feel, or makes this way. So I want to talk about resentment within the relationship anyway. And this also happens in friendships. When I'm studying relationships, when you're in relationship coaches, when you're doing case studies, it's honestly like a game of find the resentment within couples, all right? So there would be case studies and they would be talking to us in the therapy room, blah, blah, blah. So we would have to try to find where the resentment lies within the relationship. So you're asking questions until you find that resentment. And then once you find the resentment, then you can begin to work on it, because resentment is the biggest amount of distance, all right? So say your partner's going out, they're not helping very much. They're doing things that are kind of annoying you, but you're not enough to annoy you, not enough to say to you. And also if don't have great communication talks with your partner and you don't have that time in the week, then sometimes the resentment can build and build and build. And that's when, do you want to have sex with your partner? Do you want to be intimate with your partner when they're actually pissing you off deep down? So let's dive into the emotion of resentment. We've dived into a few emotions before in previous episodes. So resentment's kind of the one thing that's going to be the biggest killer of relationships, intimacy, closeness. And you can also feel this within your friendships as well. So this isn't just like romantic partners. This is something, and also your family members, your family, your friends. Like a very good example of resentment would be like, say your parents are probably spending more, they go and visit your sister more, or they do stuff like that. Like there's a little bit of resentment. Then you're like, well, I'm not going to go home. But you don't actually recognize what's happening there. Instead of having a conversation of, you know, I want to feel heard, I want to feel seen within this relationship, you end up just retracting, and it's really unconscious. And then that's when like emotional distance happens within families and friends and relationships, because you end up almost like silently, subconsciously punishing them by like maybe doing the same thing to them, or like withdrawing. And that's where like the rejection comes in. And then that's why people just don't become, they stop becoming close and stuff like that. So resentment, what is it and where does it come from? And what is its use? Because as you know from previous episodes, in emotions, usually every emotion plays a part and is a trigger for something in your life. So each one of us has an expectation on how we should all be treated. And it comes from how we were treated as a kid, how we were treated growing up, how we see others treated. You know, and we kind of look at our parents, like what they think is right and wrong. And we have a basics of what is expected as human beings as well. So usually if you have good self-worth, you will have that expectation as well of somebody else. But the thing about it is that why is resentment coming more into place with partners, friendships, and families? So basically, the more you trust someone, the more you expect from them. All right. So resentment can come up massively in close relationships because we expect more of them, and we expect respect, love, generosity, kindness. So it's more likely that you're going to experience resentment within the close relationships too. You're not really going to find resentment to someone that you barely know or a very much acquaintance, really. Small things like resentment could be like, do you ever go out for dinner and everyone always pays for rounds, and then someone doesn't pay for, there's always that one person that doesn't pay for rounds, isn't it? And like, you might have a bit of resentment. You might be like, well, I always pay for your rounds, blah, blah, blah. But then like, instead of being like, hi, do you ever, like, having that conversation, which, to be honest, is anyone going to have that conversation? Probably not. But like, sometimes you feel a little bit of resentment to them. And then you're like, oh, well, I expect a friend to be, if we're buying rounds, they buy rounds. Like, it's such a small way to think about it. But the way you expect your friend to be, and then if they're not acting up to your expectations, then a resentment can build and distance can build, and stuff like that. We also see a lot of resentment that builds in new mums, because obviously I spoke about it before. New mums are obviously 24 hours working around the clock, and then men's life don't seem to change that much. Even if, say for example, like, you're pregnant and your partner's out drinking all the time, of course you're going to find that hard, and you're going to feel resentment because you can't drink, and you're going to feel that with them. But when you recognize it and you have a conversation, be like, oh, actually, I'm feeling a bit like lonely, and like, I feel like sometimes I want to be supported, so maybe you could come home with me sometimes. Another big resentment situation that I hear a lot is people moving countries for their partners. So moving to Australia, moving to America, wherever you're moving, if you move somewhere for your partner, but you also like didn't really want to move, a lot of resentment can build. And like, I personally moved for someone like a few boyfriends years ago, and I'm like, I'm doing this for you and you're treating me like this. Resentment building. And then if they do something wrong, then you've got so much resentment built that like that fight just can become so chaotic, because you're already resenting everything that's happening. But anyway, the problem with this is that resentment is really good, because resentment can help you understand that there's like an off balance within your relationship or something like that. So it's kind of telling you something. But the only thing about resentment is usually the emotion comes first, and it's in your face, right? And it makes you feel something, but also like you don't really know how to handle it. It's very subconscious. But we really do need to understand to get past it. If we ignore it, it can build and build and build, and then like creates this massive amount of distance. And I'm sure some of you are actually recognizing this pattern within an old relationship, because usually if you're not having these communication things, then usually you end up having this massive barrier, and then like something massive happens. Like, imagine having so much resentment for someone. That happens a lot as well in like cheating. There's so much resentment in the relationship because somebody, something, whatever, and they don't talk about it. So it's like the subconscious thing to do to just, no, I'm saying subconscious, but I mean unconscious. Sorry. Well, it's in your subconscious, but unconsciously they're feeling all this resentment and they go and do something stupid. It's almost like to get them back or to get on that level. But that's a good example of emotion comes first, and then your understanding is not coming second. So that's why this podcast is here, because we want to put your understanding first, so that when this arises, that you can understand it and you can get through it, because resentment's going to come all the time in your relationship, and that's totally fine. That just shows there's a little off balance. But when we talk about it and we have this communication, it can become so easy. Not easy, but it can become a really good tool to help your relationship build. Obviously I do Fanos, right? So if you haven't heard me talk about Fanos, it is a communication tool between you and your partner. I've actually did it with roommates as well. There is a podcast on it, but me and Sam do it every few weeks. Japan, when we moved in, we were like, we should do it every week, because we're going to have to deal with a lot of issues, because we're going to live together. And we did have to deal with a lot of issues living together. Like, and now we've finally came out the other end of like understanding each other and also having that communication. So I personally like to do, if you don't want to do Fanos, also there's a podcast on Fanos. I think it's literally the most previous season before this. Just type in Fanos in the podcast, it probably would come up. And this is basically where I do like a 10-minute conversation with my partner. We bring up any needs, any wants, any feelings, any resentment, and just kind of get that going. And one thing I've always, said to my partner is, if you're feeling any type of way like that, then you always have to communicate that with me, because we don't want to be that distant. I remember one time, I think when we were first dating, like he seen a video of me talking about being single, whatever, before we were together. And I think he seen it and thought that it was a new video or something, whatever. I think it was like a TikTok thing. But anyway, he was holding a wee bit of resentment for that. And like, I remember he didn't get me flowers or something. He didn't get me flowers. And then I was like, I feel like you're resenting me for this. He's like, no, you think you know everything. But then when he was drunk, he was like, well, you said this. And I was like, you were resenting me. And then that caused you distance. And then you tried to unconsciously punish me. That's what kind of happens. And I know it all. But he's like, no, you don't. And I'm like, yes, I do. So how do we do this? You need to deep dive into when you're feeling this resistance and become more aware of how you feel. When you're feeling distant, try to look for where there could be possible resentment. And the resentment could be tiny. It could be like, I've washed the dishes 4 times this week. I put on the dishwasher 10 times this week and you haven't. Like, it could be something so small. But then when you have this like conversation, be like, obviously I have an open conversation every so often, be like, look, babe, that really annoys me because it makes me feel like I'm alone. I feel like I'm doing it all, blah, blah, blah. And then he'll be like, oh my God, I didn't realize. I'm so sorry. I didn't even realize that you were doing it all. So all that distance could be for nothing because he's not even realizing until you actually set the expectation for him. The feeling is something deep down, feeling like they don't respect you or they don't care. So that's usually the feeling of resentment and what it brings. Like you feel not respected. So if someone said something to you in public in front of your friends or something like that, you can feel resentment because like it doesn't feel like they respect you. Do you know what I mean? I remember even Sam said something, me and Sam were with our parents and I had said something about like money or something. I can't remember whatever. And like straight away, like that evening, Sam pulled me up on it and he was like, I feel like you shouldn't have like said that. That made me feel this way. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize. You're fucking right. I was like that shouldn't be said, that we shouldn't be talking about that. Do you know what I mean? And you're totally right. But like if he didn't bring that up, he could have been sitting annoyed at me all day. Right. And he could have been annoyed at me. And then that night we would have cut out and he could have drank a wee bit more. It pissed me off. Oh no, I'll stay out because if he didn't communicate it, he would be feeling that resentment, causing that distance, causing that rejection. So when something arises, I'm like, if something arises, you tell me. If something arises in me, I tell you, because I know firsthand, even in relationship coaching, that resentment is the single-handedly the biggest reason why people break up. But when you recognize that, realize it, deep dive into it and have a conversation, then it can be solved. All right. And it's because the other person can be unaware that you've disrespected them. Do you know what I mean? So here's a few symptoms of resentment that you might understand. So anger, feeling tense, high heart rate, feeling very triggered, hostility, so becoming really cold, keeping everyone at bay. You may even notice this with your friends as well. Like if you feel like they're starting to annoy you or you feel that resentment feeling bubbling, you just don't call them that day or you just don't text them. You're like, well, no, I don't text them. You know what I mean? So that feeling can sometimes be resentment. Lashing out is another one. So I feel like lashing out is like, I'm always a cold shoulder than a lash out. So I feel like when I'm start feeling like a cold shoulder, distant feeling, I will start to examine before lashing out. So this is good. Then we have withdrawal. And then we have protest, which kind of remind me of the same. So you're obviously going to withdraw. Protest is kind of like what I was saying before. Like if Sam was actually annoyed at me and then he didn't say to me, he might stay out late that night or he never does that. But like, he might be like, well, I'm going to stay out tonight. Or, you know, or if say Sam did something and I didn't communicate it, then maybe I'll stay out for the girls all night and see how he feels. That's like a bit of a protest. Do you know what I mean? Which, you know, this happens in relationships. It's not a big deal, but I don't let it go on for very long. And also recognize it. You can recognize it in your own brain, be like, I did protest because of that. So maybe I'll tell him that's how I felt instead of protesting. But the thing about it is that your behavior can sometimes be invalid because you don't actually know. You haven't had that conversation to see what they're actually thinking and feeling. So most relationships and fights are all because of resentment, and you just need to get to the bottom of it. Label it. So when I'm feeling like that, or I'm feeling annoyed, I'm feeling any way distant, I will label it and be like, right, where can I find the resentment? And then I'll have the conversation. And remember, like, it's an emotional alarm, right? And it just needs your attention, because if you let it linger, oh my God, that song, Let It Linger. No, sorry, it's so addictive right now. What's the start of it? Don't let it burn. Sorry. Am I okay? Don't let it linger, guys. Do not let the resentment linger because it will ruin your relationships. All right. You're probably right. I know you're recognizing it in an old relationship right now. You're probably thinking, yeah, that was my old relationship. Anyway, in terms of resentment being emotional trigger or emotional alarm, a good example is like when you're in a relationship, right, and you're not living together and your partner, you always go over to your partner's house, right? And they never come over to your house, right? That is an emotional alarm, right? You're going to feel that resentment. You're going to be like, well, why don't, and then you might protest, oh, I'm not going over to his tonight because we always go over to his. He never wants to go over to mine, right? There's your protest. There's your resentment, all right? But what does it actually mean? It means there's an imbalance in the relationship most of the time, all right? So if your partner is not coming over to your house and you're going over to their house all the time, that's an emotional alarm that there is an imbalance. So that is a conversation that needs to be had. So when you feel resentment, know that it's an emotional alarm, and sometimes it can be an imbalance. All right. So then that's when you need to like figure out what the imbalance is. But what we want to do is like not have that bigger divide. You know, if your partner doesn't go to your house and blah, 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 like, and you're going through this and you're divided, and the next thing, will you never come to my house and blah, blah, blah. That's usually what happens. It's usually you just end up having this big fight, when in fact, like if you feel the imbalance, you feel the resentment, you have the conversation, like, I just feel like this is a bit imbalanced. I feel like you don't come over to my house. And he'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I just realized because I thought this was closer to your work, blah, 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 blah. Like usually resentment fades with more information. So that's usually what you need to do. You need to be seeking more information. Another way resentment can come up is when two people are very different. Me, very yellow personality, very late, no concept of time. If you're friends with someone who is a blue personality, my mom's very blue, and she likes to be on time for everything. All right. And that could cause resentment because she's like, why are you always late? And I'm like, well, mom, chill. We're just going shopping. Like there's no actually time to go. Like you can get resentment through that. But again, resentment fades with more information. So like I could feel resentment for my mom for being so strict on me and telling me to be there at that time and like telling me to clean up and whatever, blah, blah. But like my mom's a blue personality. And when you understand a blue personality, they feel anxious if things aren't in place. So like, why do I want my mummy to feel anxious? Do you know what I mean? And then like the more information I know about her, you know, she doesn't like being late. She makes her feel not good. Why it's like for me, because I'm like, oh yeah, whatever. Like we'll get there when we get there. You know, I'm very lackadaisical. If I miss my flight, I miss my bus, you know, whatever. Like it doesn't give me anxiety. I always I'm a bit of a solution-based thinker. Like whatever happens comes my way, whatever. And mum like would feel really anxious. So I'm like, the more I understand about her and the more information that I get, the resentment will fade between us. That's why it's very good to understand other people and their personality. So a really good book for that is Surrounded by Idiots. It has 4 personalities. I actually have a podcast on it, very first season again. Cracking book will help you really understand other people. You know, Sam's for me is a red personality. His way, highway, right? I'm a bit like, yeah, whatever, do whatever, you know, and his way, highway, right? And he also is like very truthful, very right. Whereas I like would tippy toe around things. He likes to complain at restaurants and I physically cannot go. And he doesn't complain, but he complains when things go wrong. I am like, no, I'm mortified. I'm going to die. But like, that's his personality because like he thinks he likes to be truthful. He likes to be honest. Whereas I'm like, cave the peace. It's all yellow mellow over here. Do you know what I mean? Okay. So know that also resentment, it's protection. It's our way of responding to an injustice that we think is an injustice. We then close off emotionally to protect ourselves, which is protection in itself, to avoid ever being hurt again. So we feel resentment and we're like, oh, they're doing something that feels imbalanced. They're doing something that might hurt me. Run away, run away, run away. It's a little thing in your brain that just responds to just protection, to just protect you. So if you tell your brain that, be like, okay, you're just trying to protect me. Let's figure this out. But also knowing that like, when you feel resentment, it's an alarm signal, right? It's a low vibrational emotion, right? So we want to get out of it. So when we're in it, we don't want to live in it, all right? And some people do live in resentment. They just live there, all right? They just like hate everyone and just judge everyone. And they're in this resentment, right? Low vibration, very low. And when we feel this, we need, as a spiritual person, when we feel low vibrations, how do we get up, all right? So we need to always know how to get out of those. And this is why I'm here. So if you want to move out of resentment, it is useful, but we need to remove it. Understand it, harbor it, name it, and then you release it with more information. That is a little bit about resentment. Hopefully you understand it a little bit more. You also need to understand that you can lose relationships if you ignore it. And you can work through things with people, but also sometimes it can be too much. Too much resentment in a relationship, or it's gone too far, can just sometimes be a little bit too much, and people are just like, right, I'm done with that. So to fix it in your relationships, and you don't want your partner to be your roommate, you need to be open. You need to be soft, communicative. You need to understand yourself more and them. So when they're feeling distant, you can also examine them for their resentment. I mean, I do that all the time. I'm like, where is his resentment now? And he's like, no, it's not. And I'm like, yes, it is. And it always is. It always is. What can I say? What can I say? I read too many books. And another thing is like just asking your partner questions and understanding your own expectations. Like sometimes I talked about the emotion of hurt in that Mastering Emotions podcast way back in season 1. And usually your expectations of what you expect is usually going to lead to the resentment and your hurt. So when you expect so much of someone, sometimes you can fall into resentment, but it depends. Like, are you going to fix your expectations? Are you going to communicate them more? And stuff like that. So understanding the emotion of hurt and why you feel hurt can usually help as well. So like, for example, you don't expect much of a stranger on the street. So say, for example, you drop something, but if you expected so much of a stranger and you drop something on the street and they didn't pick it up, you'd be angry, lashing out. So your expectations can really determine your reaction. So have a look at your expectations of what you expect of people as well. And usually when you're a really kind, generous person, you expect everyone to be kind and generous back, but sometimes people just aren't like that. So sometimes you just gotta fucking let that go. Sometimes I'd be like, no, I'm just gonna be a nice person. If you don't want to be a nice person, then like I'm not gonna expect that, because that means I'm gonna get hurt. So sometimes understanding hurt, which is in that other podcast. So also journaling. Journaling probably is the number one thing that I would recommend to anybody to help with resentment, because if you're actually feeling emotionally distant, you can say, feeling a little bit emotionally distant from trying to figure it out why I feel like this, blah, blah. And then you can go through and then when you start writing down, well, he didn't do this. Well, is that really a big deal that he didn't do that? Do I need to be feeling so angry? Well, maybe not. Maybe if I communicate with him. Usually journaling can really bring this out and also can help you with your reactions, because sometimes if we just continue resenting, then we just burst. Whilst if we can break down in our journal how we're feeling every day, then we can probably get to the resolution sooner. Which also brings me to meditation. I personally wrote a meditation as well for like me and Sam moving in together. It's called Be Better. It's on our membership hub or the Braveway Hub app. And it's a really good way to become less reactive and understand, things you said in the moment. Yeah, if you are looking to become more aware of who you are, more aware of your feelings, become a better person, like meditation is the absolute best thing that you can do for that. It allows you to like step back, see your emotions, play them out, and it gives you that moment in the morning or in the evening or whenever you want to meditate to just process how you're feeling, how you're going to react, how you reacted, reflecting, and just overall becoming an absolute better person. So again, if you want to try meditation, you can use code MEDITATE into the Braveway Hub or the 21-day course, and that will give you a discount. You should really try it though, because in my opinion, it's absolutely excellent. So yeah, that is that section. I need to remember which button it is. I think it's a blue one. There we go. Next section, quote of the week. So the quote of the week is from A New Earth, and it actually ties into a meditation that I just wrote. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste this. The joy of being, which is the only true happiness. It cannot come to you through any form, possession, achievement, person, or event, through anything that happens. That joy cannot come to you ever. It emanates from the formless dimension within you, from consciousness itself, and thus is one with who you are. I did a meditation this morning with the Braveway crew on a live call, and it was basically called Freedom. And it's about removing attachments. So attachments to your partner, your job, like attaching all of this to your happiness. Like, when I get that job, I'm going to be happy. This is what makes me worthy. This is what I need. Attaching your looks your looks and your body to like your worth, all these things, thinking like these are the things that are going to make me happy, when in fact, none of those things really are stable enough for you to have your joy. So your joy of being is your joy of self, all right? And you find that little inner peace within things like meditation and breath work and stuff. And you find this inner peace that when you close your eyes, you're like, well, when you have this bit of peace and nothing really matters on the outside. And I always think like life ebbs and flows in your life. Things are so crazy sometimes. There's a lot of downfall and a lot of ins and outs. And you have to just become this like stable mountain in the middle and realize that life just ebbs and flows. And we shouldn't be attached to anything. We should just be enjoying the journey and know that we are here to evolve and grow. And we always have ourself. And that for me is such a good thing to get out of my lack mentality. Sometimes I'm like, I don't have this and I don't have that. And, you know, I just bought a house and I just felt like it just drained all my money. And I started to overthink and think, how am I going to buy a house with Sam? How are we going to do this together? Like, this took all my money and oh my God, lack. And I realized that like I never used to have that money that I spent on that house. I never literally had a penny and I was so happy. And I can be happy just in the present moment, in the now, looking at my nice flowers, laughing with loved ones. And sometimes you just need to realize that all those outside things aren't attached to your soul happiness. Yes, they add and they bring joy and they bring involvement and they bring growth. But your joy of being you is what's most important. So you need to work on that in order to feel that fulfillment of happiness and contentment, which you obviously work on if you read or meditate or you do all the things like journal and have that introspective feeling. So yeah, next section. Yay. So I'm going to just take a question from you guys. I put up a question box today. I got some lovely feedback from the podcast this week. So I just want to say thank you so much for that. And anytime you're sharing really helps because obviously because I take such long breaks, I kind of do sometimes lose people in that. And then like when you share, it really, really helps, obviously. Someone shared me on TikTok the other day and she was so funny. And I was just like, she doesn't know how much that like is so good for me and my podcast. She was just like, oh, I listen to Sinead Hegarty. She put on her podcast and people are writing under it like, oh, wow, podcast. I'm like, and like we are just an independent podcast. Like we just, me and Kyle just be rocking this out, you know? So one question was like, how to keep the faith with manifesting and self-work after setbacks in relationships. And I actually like questions like this because I feel like in the moment, you're like, well, I'm manifesting this and it's not happening. You feel like something's wrong or you feel like, you know, but when I look at even my own journey, like I remember 2 years ago, I was looking at my time hop there, which is something that you can see what you were doing like last year, year before, 2 years ago, crying my eyes out, coming to Australia, like this is not how it's meant to be. I wasn't meant to be here at 31 or 30. Yeah, 30. I was meant to be coming here alone. I was meant to be starting my life. And, you know, how am I meant to like be single and like do all this when like there's so many things I want in life. And I was going through all that in my head and like over and over and over again, I'm like thinking that's a bad thing that like, you know, oh, my manifesting isn't working. This is meant to be working out for me, blah, blah, blah. When in fact, like it worked out even better. It worked out so amazing. Like, and I sometimes look at my partner and I'm like, as if I was going to miss out on this feeling and this feeling of feeling so loved and so cared for and so heard and so loved. I didn't even know what that really, really felt like. Like in times I'm like, this is like the best feeling I could have. Whilst back then I was like, oh my God, as if I'm alone and starting fresh and like, how am I going to find who I want and blah, blah, blah. And like everything was working out for me. And all that work I did on myself allowed me to walk away from relationships that weren't serving me and also know my worth to be with someone who sees my worth. So yeah, thank you for that question. I just also want to say thank you again for listening to the podcast. Hopefully you like this one. If you really like it, please, it really helps me if you share it on your story or if you give me a review or you tell your friends or put it in the WhatsApp group. So thank you so much and I'll see you next week.